Hello, everybody. Welcome to the After Show. Glad to have you here. It is a very melancholy day for me today. It's, on the one hand, when you lose a really good friend of yours, it's obviously, the loss will affect you in waves over the next few, days and weeks and months. But because of the condition Frank had been in ever since the accident, and in case you're just joining me and haven't heard the news, don't understand what I'm referring to, Frank Pastore, who was a guest host of this program 100 times in the early days of the show, and was a guest host for a show that I produced before this back in Los Angeles on Christian radio on KKLA, hosted by Warren Duffy. Frank had to guest host at least 100 times over there over the 4, 5, 6 years that I was involved with that programming. And he eventually got the show on his own, and I think it was the Monday after the election, if I'm not mistaken. It was the Monday after the election, and he was on his way home on his motorcycle, a purple Honda Shadow. He's in the carpool lane of the 210 freeway heading home. And a lady 2 lanes over, for some who knows reason, swerved 2 lanes over and clipped him on his bike at speed, knocked him off his bike. Did suffer some fairly traumatic brain injury and was in a medically induced coma for a few days. And then as the medically induced part kind of waned off, they kept waiting for him to wake up, and he never really did regain consciousness. And they eventually moved him out of the trauma hospital in East LA at County USC Hospital, and they moved him to a more local care hospital. And somewhere in the course of that, he'd started to develop pneumonia. And that pneumonia kind of gradually got worse over the last few days, and apparently earlier this afternoon he did succumb to some a cardiac arrest as a complication of the pneumonia. And it was really hard on everybody to see Frank just laying there and not seeing the animated, the persona that was Frank. And yes, the body was alive, but he really wasn't in there. And nobody really knew if he was going to come back out of it or not. And it was probably harder on his family to just not know what they could or could not be dealing with in the days, weeks, months, and who knows, years ahead. And that unknown and that uncertainty is something where my prayer is that I know where Frank is at now. Frank was a believer. There's zero doubt in what he believed. I know where Frank's at. And because of that, I'm not worried about Frank whatsoever. There is a whole host of former Major League ball players that are playing baseball right now and just couldn't wait to have Frank get up there and serve up batting practice fastballs. And I'm sure that's taking place right now. Frank is going to do all right. I have no problems with him. I just hopefully God's grace and mercy will bestow upon his wife and family, and they get through the next period of time and just come to grips with this and move along, because that's what Frank would want him to do. Frank would want him to just keep on at it. That's just the way he was. He never was a quitter. He never really got down. He never gave up. He was always on the go. I've got 3 basic stories I want to tell about him that I don't think anybody on the outside, meaning outside of our little world, outside of our Diagon Alley of radio, have heard before. And I think I've told the story of how Frank and I really met and how we got started. We were on the back of a boat in a sales luncheon, catering lunch and recognizing all the sponsors of KKLA, our sister station at the time. And we're in Newport Harbor having a boat cruise. and we're on the back end of this boat on the stern, kind of just looking out over the bay. Gorgeous Southern California day, like 330 like days are a year here. And Frank had always been he was just a talker, always a talker, just gabbed about everything, and just effervescent. I mean, just life just oozed out of this guy. He was always on. You know, when he was awake, he was on. When he was asleep, he's gone. And so we're talking about this and that and the other, and I'd finally asked him if he wanted to guest host, and as soon as he heard that, his eyes lit up, and he goes, "Oh, absolutely! Anything I can do. I'll be your student. You be my teacher. You'll be like my pitching coach. Just tell me what I need to do. I'm a perfect student. I'll do this." And just motor mouth. That's just how he was. So we worked with him, and he ended up coming in and doing one day that we knew, okay, this was going to be the tryout day. This was going to be, if he could do the local show in Los Angeles. We also were doing a nationally syndicated show at the time too. We did 5 hours a day then. We did 2 hours on a network clock, and then we would come back and do 3 hours in Los Angeles for drive time. And we wanted to try him out local first before we turned him loose on the network. And the first day he came in, it was so funny to watch him do it, because he hadn't been in baseball for, at the time, 10 years, something like that. And he had already figured out what he wanted to say. We got all the guests lined up. Everything was all fine. He had his notes. He had his prep. Everything was fine. 15 minutes before the show starts, he's gone. And I'm looking around, where is this guy? Turns out he was in the restroom, throwing up. And just nerves, just pregame jitters. So he gets a hold of himself and comes back in and sits down and does a fairly remarkable job as a guest host. You know, there was some nerves, there was some jitters, but by the end of the show, he kind of hit his groove. But the funny thing about Frank is his studio is shaped different, or the studio we were at was shaped different than this one, meaning there was 3 rooms kind of all in the same line of sight. If you can imagine where you're looking at, let's say where your camera angle is, you are the talk studio. Okay, so the booth is all around you. You are the eyes of where the host is sitting. And then there would be a narrow sliver of a room, paned with glass, and then paned with glass behind it. And that's where the engineer sat. And the mixing board was there. And then the room right behind that is where my producer room would be, and I'm kind of on an elevated chair looking over the engineer into the talk studio. So all 3 of us were in line of sight. That's just the way the studio was done. And every time he would have some commentary point he was trying to make, or some issue he was trying to get his thinking across, he kept acting like a pitcher as he was doing it. Now, how, you ask, does a pitcher do talk radio? Well, you're always loosening up the arm. So every time he's about ready to make a point, he's loosening up and making sure he's doing this, and he's like he's looking in for a sign as he's doing his radio, and he has no idea at all that he's doing it. I'm sitting 2 rooms away, and I've got my catcher's mitt, and I'm giving him signs, because he keeps looking in for the sign. So I felt I had to help. I was trying to be a producer. I was trying to give him what he needed. He was looking for signs, so I was giving him signs. And finally, at a commercial break, he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He says, "What am I doing?" And I started doing all the same motions. He starts laughing. You know, that roarous laugh that he has. And he says, it's just instinct. He says, "I've done that for so long. It's just, I'll eventually learn how to not to do that, but that's just whenever he was getting ready for the big game or get ready for his performance, all he knew how to do was to loosen up, and that's how he loosened up." So we put him on the network because he did pretty well on the local show. So the next time he hosted, I don't know, a couple weeks, 3 weeks later, he comes in and does the network show. The difference between the network show and local drive time is the network clock is very much like the clock is on this show, which is every break is a hard break. You've got to be out at a certain second, certain minute, certain second, every segment. And if you're not out, the network shuts you down anyway, and you get cut off mid-sentence, and they go to commercial time because everybody's on the same clock. And so he works his way through the first couple breaks, and that's fine. And then we get to the big close. And there's 40 seconds of music that when you start to hear just the whisper of the music, and it starts gradually fading up, and it goes for 40 seconds and gets this really hard swell and then crashes at the end. And it doesn't sound like a lot of time, but 40 seconds when you're talking it's an insanely long period of time. It really is. So when a newbie really hears that swell and they know they've got to stick to dismount, is what we call it in radio terms, meaning the closing segment, the closing minute of the segment, he hears the music and something tripped in his head, and he goes, "This is Frank Pastore filling in for Warren Duffy. We'll be back right after this." And you now have, of the 40 usable seconds of time, you have about 38.5 seconds left. And so that music just plays and plays and plays. Lovely little melody. I'm not sure what it was, but just this lovely little melody plays. And Frank looks at me with horror. And I just have a smile on my face. I'm looking at him, waiting for the music to finish playing. And he says, "Was that okay?" I said, "Oh, that was great, Frank." I said, "Just imagine what you could have done for the world with that extra 30 seconds. Just imagine what you could have done for Jesus with 30 seconds more airtime that you just gave away because you decided you wanted to play instrumental music." And he just threw his headphones down, and he says, "I'll fix it next time." And he went. I made him listen to himself. I gave him exactly the same advice I gave Tammy, believe it or not, and he did it. And he gradually got better, and actually he got better rather quickly. And he became a wonderful host of his own program, The Frank Pastore Show, for 9 years. And he's got a remarkable tenure. I just hope, I've already kind of put the bug in. I really want the station to start compiling as much of the archive and the record of Frank Pastore as they can, and not let those tapes, not let those CDs, not let all that, all those computer files disappear, because even though his family are probably not thinking about it right now, he's got a really small grandkid, and I think they may have some others on the way, and it would be a really good thing to save all that for the grandkids, so that when they get old enough to understand, they can understand what Frank was about and what he thought and what he believed. So I really hope they do that. Second thing I want to talk about is on the baseball side. Again, great broadcaster, great theologian. He knew apologetics really well. He was a very gifted professor both at Biola and knew a lot about the faith. I mean, he knew how to explain the faith. He wasn't just one of these guys that spoke in Christianese. He was able to translate what the Gospels were about, what we believe, to virtually all audiences, and had no problems mixing it up and getting into debates and arguments and explaining why it is we believe what we believe. He was very good at it. But he also, on the side, before he got the full-time job doing radio, he was a baseball tutor. And what I mean by that is every weekend he would take on 8, 9, 10 kids at a time that wanted to learn how to pitch, and he would give pitching lessons. There was a park right, I want to say half a mile from where he lived in the Inland Empire, and this park became Frank's office. And he would take his car and go down there, open up the back hatch, and he'd have all his implements of destruction. He'd have his bucket to sit on. He'd have his first baseman's mitt, which was basically his idea of a catcher's mitt. He liked using that better than a catcher's mitt. And he worked with kids. He taught them how to pitch, taught them how to throw classic fastballs, taught them how to throw curveballs the right way so you don't screw your arm up. He taught them sliders, taught them all sorts of things. And at all age levels, from 8 years old all the way to he had some kids that were past high school, working in college, and they were about ready to go into the minor league system. And he was the reason he was such a good coach and the reason he was such a good teacher is because he was such a big kid himself that he related with the kids really, really well. And that whole infectious personality, he'd ask them to do something, and I mean, they'd do it. And they'd do it in a second. He just had that gift. Not everybody has the gift to be a coach. He did. One of the things that was going along in the process was of me getting to know him on a professional level, and then also as just a personal friend, is my son Elliot was, I want to say 7 going on 8, going on 9, kind of in that range. And I had asked him if he wanted to learn how to pitch because Frank had told me that one of the things he wanted to pay me back for, which I told him he didn't have to, but he says, no, seriously, you've given me all these chances, and I may get a chance to get a show down the road, and I really want to repay you. I want to do all this to... I said, you're good at this. You don't know me anything. He says, no, he said, seriously. He said, if Ellie wants to learn how to pitch, I'd be happy to teach him how to pitch. So I said, fine, I'll ask him. Of course, Elliot says, yeah, I want to learn how to pitch. That would be kind of cool. And so I took him up there one weekend. And he worked with him a little bit and taught him the basics of how to grip and how to throw. And we started doing lessons. We probably did lessons, I want to say, 3 times a month for probably a year, almost a year. And he got pretty good at this. And I'll never forget one of the times I went up there. The previous season, Elliot had done Little League. He had gotten plunked by one of the hardest throwing kids at his age level in Double-A. And when this kid plunked him, he plunked him pretty hard. I mean, he plunked him in the where did he get him? He got him in the, I don't know, in the neck or something. I mean, it was one that really made you cringe. It hurt. And from that point on, Elliot was afraid of the ball. He wasn't afraid of the ball when he had a glove on and he was out in the field, but when he was in the batter's box, he wasn't digging being in the batter's box. What 8-year-old kid that gets a beanball really wants to? And so Frank noticed that one week. And he said, you're afraid of the ball. And Elliot goes, no, I'm not. He goes, yeah, you're afraid of the ball. He says, we're gonna fix that right now. Now, that week, my wife happened to want to come up and watch. Normally, it was just dad time. This time, Mom wanted to go and see what this was all about. So Mom comes up with Dad. And so we're having a good time. And we're sitting on the grass, and we're minding our own business. We're casually observing, but staying far enough away, we're not getting in the way. And Frank says, okay, here's what we're going to do. Grab a bat, and we're going to go inside this backstop, and I'm going to throw at you. And you can imagine the look on my wife's face when she says, what is he going to do to our only son? And sure enough, he slaps a glove down on the grass in front of the backstop. He says, that's home plate. Get in there and get set. So my son gets there and gets set, and he's got the look of terror in his eyes. Frank goes out about 100 feet, and he's got a bucket of balls. And he doesn't just throw Double-A Little League 40-mile-an-hour balls. He throws about an 85-mile... My son doesn't even have a helmet on. He's just standing there, 8-year-old kid, with a little tiny bat. And Frank throws one, misses him by that much, and fires it right into the backstop. And I think I still have scars on my forearm that were from my wife's fingernails. And she's like, "You've got to do something." And I said, "Let it ride. I'm telling you, just let it go." And the next pitch, he started to flinch, and he almost flinched himself into getting beaned. And Frank says, "I'm telling you, don't move." He called him E-Monster. That was just, he called him meat, and he called him everybody's meat, by the way. The line out of the line that you saw in the '88 movie Bull Durham, where everybody calls everybody meat. That's everybody calls everybody meat for real, because you get traded like a piece of meat when you finally get to the majors, and that's just how everybody was. And so he's like, "I'm telling you, meat, don't move. If you move, you're going to get hit. Do not move. I'm telling you." And so he locked himself into place, and it was like something surreal to watch, because you could see him paint a silhouette from 100 feet away from the back of his knees. He painted a silhouette all the way around him into the backstop with baseballs. His accuracy in how he threw was absolutely pinpoint perfect. He could hit exactly what he was aiming at. The problem was, as he would say in his baseball career, his problem was he was too perfect in how he threw, because he almost always threw strikes, and it was hard for him to waste a pitch. And so he developed this knack of being a batting practice pitcher, and when he got to the bigs, they were paid big money to hit fastballs. And that's why he got lit up a lot, is because he was almost too good at what he did. And he wasn't wild enough. But anyway, he hit exactly what he was aiming at, and so my wife and I are watching these 80-plus mile-an-hour fastballs just buzzing our son all the way around him. But the funny thing is, he wasn't afraid of the ball after that, because when you're sitting there and you're watching these things whiz by you, 4 days later when you go to your Little League game and some little snot-nosed 8-year-old kid throws a 40-mile-an-hour cream puff compared to these 85-mile-an-hour fastballs, it didn't bother him so much. And it was that was just a whole fascinating thing to watch how he interacted with the kids. He was a big kid himself, and that's just how he did. The baseball world, at least his coaching world, interacted for one day with his radio world. And that is because, you know Mr. Countdown, right? Anthony, you hear his voice every day doing the countdown stuff. He's going to host a show here on the Dwayne FM channel in just a little bit on New Year's Day. Anthony is addicted to zip ties. If you look at this studio, every cord, every cable in the studio is zip tied in place to within an inch of its life. You know what I'm talking about, those little plastic zip ties. You wrap around cords and you pull it through and then you cut off the excess. Frank had never in his life seen a zip tie until he started working for this show. And he was amazed, fascinated, childlike wonder at zip ties. And he's like, "Dude, you know what I can do with these zip ties?" And I go, "No, what?" He says, "You coming up to the park this weekend?" I go, "Well, yeah, we have an appointment." "Good. You just wait. You're going to see what I've got lined up." I said, "Okay." So we go up the next weekend, and sure enough, he pulls out the trusty first baseman's mitt. Except the trusty first baseman's mitt has now been completely restrung. Instead of leather, sewing the pocket and all the fingers together, yes, that's right, the entire leather glove is now sewed together with 150 zip ties. And he thought that was the coolest thing ever. Until the first pitch hit it. There was a kid in front of us that was a high school kid. Probably throws 88, 89 miles an hour. Lively arm for a high school kid. And Frank says, "Watch this." First pitch comes in. Snap. Plastic doesn't give the way leather gives. Except he heard something crackle and he looks down and didn't think much of it. Second pitch comes in. Ball hits the pocket of the glove. The pocket and the ball goes behind him by about, 60 feet. And he's got a big hole there where there used to be the rest of his glove because the zip ties didn't quite stand up and give like the leather gives. And that pretty much ended the zip tie experiment. He says, I didn't think about that. I said, no, but damn, I wish I had my camera, because that would have been wonderful to have. And he starts roaring. We had a great time. Whenever we would go out anywhere, whenever we would do anything, we just had a great time. He was the life of the party wherever you went. The last thing I want to tell you about was, and this also involves Anthony, Mr. Countdown. Anthony is eccentric, is probably the best way to describe him. He doesn't really draw that much attention to himself, or tries not to draw that much attention to himself, except for once a decade. Whenever it's his birthday, and it's got one of those round zeros, well, as opposed to a straight zero, that's kind of a stupid way to say it. Whenever he hits the decade birthday, he throws a concert for himself. Now, that doesn't mean he's singing. It doesn't mean he's performing. He's mixing. He's like the Alan Parsons of engineers. He likes to get all the friends he knows in the biz doing Christian music or whatever. He's got lots of friends that are musicians, very talented, singer-songwriters, guitarists, etc., keyboardists. And he will go to his father's house in Whittier, who has a fairly nice sized backyard that can stage this. He'll get lighting, cameras, catered, the whole thing. I mean, he puts the whole event together and puts together a 3 or 4 act stage show just for his friends as a birthday present to himself. Now, that would seem odd to most people, but if you've known Anthony for as long as we've known Anthony, that's pretty much just Anthony. We've come to expect it. I've made it to 2 of these so far. I went to the 40 one, and we just went to the 50 one about 2 months ago. The 40th one was on October 26, 2002, and the reason I remember that night so well is because that happened to be Game 6 of the World Series between the Angels, my team, and the San Francisco Giants. And Frank was invited, and Hugh was invited. I think Hugh was there. Lots of our friends at Carol were there. And we all looked like Secret Service detail because we're sitting in the crowd and we're, clapping along and we're, politely nodding along as we've got little earphones in our ears and going down, draped in through our jacket pockets because we had to be. Anthony has these things managed down to the dress you're supposed to wear, meaning guys had to wear not full suits, but we had to have sport coats. It was on the invitation we had to wear sport coats. And the women's had to wear full-length evening dresses. That was on the invitation. That's how meticulous he wanted to have this spelled out. So everybody's dressed up according to Anthony's plan, except the guys are all listening to the ball game. And the ball game was not going so well for the Angels front for the first half of that game. In fact, we were down 5-0 going into the bottom of the 7th inning. And all of a sudden, we got a couple of hits back-to-back. And as soon as we got a couple of hits back-to-back, for some reason, Hewitt, Pastore, Patterson, a friend of ours that used to work at Salem's corporate office, a guy named Clint Redwine, and a handful of other people, for some reason, all had to use the facilities at exactly the same time. I'm not exactly sure why, but those facilities happened to be right next to the den inside Anthony's father's house that had a very nice color television in it that happened to have the game on. So we're all in there watching the game. And Frank doesn't watch a game like most people watch a game. I've told you the story about how Hugh and I were actually behind home plate, and we were actually there watching a game and listening to Frank talk about what really goes on, and watching a game through his eyes is unlike any baseball game you've ever seen, just because he's a player and he knows all the sub-currents that are going on pitch to pitch. So we're in there, and I've got the game on, and I've got the volume at a low enough level that it's not going to affect what's going on outside. Well, in comes Frank. Turn it up. Well, it is up. The hell with outside. That's not how you watch baseball. And he grabs the remote from me, and he cranks it up, and now the game is booming in this room. He says, that's how you watch freaking baseball. And so we're watching the game. And Anthony comes in, and he sees all five of us give him daggers as soon as he says, I guess we're going to have intermission for a little while. It's just a good idea. So they have an intermission outside while we're watching the game. And Frank called this shot before any of the rest of us did. As soon as the Angels got the two base runners on that I told you about, and we're still down 5-0, Dusty Baker, the manager of the Giants, comes out and he pulls the starter out, Russ Ortiz. And there is a reason for this story. He takes the ball from Russ Ortiz and pulls him and brings in a reliever. Except instead of keeping the ball like you normally do and then giving it to the reliever and then going back to the dugout, he took the ball from the starter and kind of rubbed it up for a second, and then he kind of looked at the starter, Russ Ortiz, and gave him the ball like, good job, we've got this game won, you've earned it, here's your game ball. And it went kind of unnoticed for a little bit, and then TV finally figured it out a little bit later. But Frank saw that in a second, and he goes, oh my gosh, did you see what he just did? And I go, what? He says, he gave him the freaking game ball. You can't do that. He says, look at what the Angels are going to do. He's showing them up. You're showing them up in their own yard. Next guy up was our first baseman, a guy named Scott Spezio. He fouled off about 4 or 5 pitches and rifled one in the right field corner for a 3-run home run. We scored 3 more runs in the 8th inning and ended up winning the game 6-5. Up till now, the largest comeback ever in a World Series game when a team is facing elimination. It was a remarkable game. Nobody saw it because it was a West Coast series. Nobody in the East Coast cared, but it was a great World Series. But Frank called his shot before even the TV announcers figured it out. And that's not saying much because the TV announcers are Tim McCarver and Joe Buck, and they don't, know anything. But it was just, Frank is the kind of guy that whenever you're in the room with him, it's not that he commands attention because he's being needy or he's being a big diva. He just commanded attention because his personality and his heart were that big. That's just how he lived life. He had a big heart, and he lived life on a large scale. And he would do anything for anybody. He just had a wonderfully infectious laugh. And as soon as you had any conversation with him, you felt like you just met one of the best friends you've ever met. And I'm telling you, I'm going to miss the guy dearly, but I know I'm going to see him again somewhere down the road. And if the Mayans are right, I'm going to see him in about 4 days. But I know a lot of you in the podcast that are listening now, I know who you are. I've seen your comments in the universe. You're probably saying, well, I guess I didn't need to listen to that after show because you didn't get to the issues. You didn't get to gun control. You didn't get to that. I'm sorry. Frank is a really, really great guy. And the thing that makes me sad is that not enough people really got to see the side of Frank that I got to see. If you haven't had a chance, I'm not here to flog his book because it just doesn't seem appropriate. But I want you, if you get a chance to read his book, Shattered, it will give you an insight into what kind of guy Frank was and what kind of life he led. And he's just one in a million. And Frank, rest in peace, man. I'm gonna miss you a lot. Adam, let's go ahead and roll it. Let's get out of here. Or not. There we go. It's going to be hard for their family, even though they are believing Christians and have acted out on faith quite admirably to a lot of us. It's still Christmas, and it's a hard time to be dealing with this at Christmas time. But I just pray they continue to show the strength and the love and the compassion that family has always shown, and they get through this. I really do, because they're just special people to me. Anyway, what is the split right now? 51 total people in here. Looks like we got about, 20 and 30, roughly, looks like. To those of you listening on the 25-26, that was close. To the 26 people hanging out in the Ustream chat room peanut gallery, and those of you listening on the podcast, whenever the podcast may be, seize the day. I'm telling you. Because you're not guaranteed anything. You can be as full of life as anybody you could possibly compare yourself to. You're not guaranteed anything. Live life. Seize the day. And that's what Frank did. Every day, he lived life on a large scale. And he went out. He went out doing exactly what he wanted to do. He loved riding that bike, and he loved doing radio. So, God bless you, brother. Adam, who sings this version? I'm getting... Oh, Hillsong's doing this, Jack. To the 26 people hanging out in the Ustream chat room peanut gallery, you know the drill. Go to ustream.tv, get yourself a free account. Grab a username. Unique to you. One that nobody else has. And then come back in over here and join the fray that will be the Hugh Hewitt Show tomorrow, where gun talk will probably continue unless something else befalls the earth. We'll cover the news, good, bad, or indifferent, as always. But it'd be great to have your input as well, so I hope you go to Ustream and get that done. I want to say thanks to Michael Patrick Tracy, the host of Conservative LA Radio, which may or may not have a brand new intro this coming Friday by somebody that it shouldn't be hard to put two and two together who may be voicing it. 7 p.m. in the West Coast, 10 p.m. in the East Coast, each and every Friday night here on the Dwayne FM 24/7 channel. This week will be the Christmas show by Michael Patrick Tracy. And you know what Christmas shows are like, right? You know all those classic old songs that you love to hear from all of time past, each and every year. You know those kind of shows, right? Well, this is not anything close to that. But it's still not too bad. Anyway. Want to say thanks also to the unofficial IT department of the Hugh Hewitt Show. George Rapp. And Baker Chick. Breck Nichols. Bruce D. Ritz. Caroline in California. Triple C6, Carl the Steelers fan. Colleen Grimson. Dave in Arizona. Isla in New Hampshire. Fair Sunshine. Hugh's iPad. John H. 54. Lilacs. Thanks for being here, James. As always. Ta-da. Major Bob 37. MN Giggle. Nacho Obama. Photog 357, the official keeper of the goods of the Hugh Hewitt Show. Ma'am. Pete GJ. Shameless One. Talk Radio 16.38 trillion. Tammy J, the instigator of all trouble around Tribaldom, and the emerging threat to talk radio. Tony Marie Rigsby in Tucson. And bringing up the rear, leading from behind, is Mendoza 2009. Mendoza, we all have a line somewhere, don't we? Thanks for being here. Hugh's back tomorrow, and we'll see where the news takes us. Frank, rest in peace, meat. See you later.
Oh, praise his name forever. His power and glory evermore proclaim. All night, divine.